He had legal papers, a judge's signature, a smooth voice and a scar down his cheek, and 30 people watching and saying nothing. He had a 9-year-old boy standing on a wooden crate in the December snow with a rope around his waist, and he was calling out prices like it was a horse auction. And one man with a bad leg and a loaded revolver stepped out of that crowd and said, "I ain't buying him. I'm asking you to take that rope off before I do it myself." What happened next will stay with you for the rest of your life. This channel is built on stories from the Old West that never make it into history books, where justice comes from ordinary people who refuse to look the other way, and family is something you choose in the snow. The lesson: evil doesn't survive because of the people who commit it. It survives because of the people who watch and do nothing. Don't be the crowd. Subscribe and stay until the very end. This story earns it. Like it, share it, and leave your city in the comments. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
Some men see a thing like that and look away. But Caleb saw his daughter running toward that boy, and that was that. This story is about what happens when a good man decides he has seen enough wrong in the world. If you want to hear it all, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. Let's get started. It was December 14th, 1887, in Burden Creek, Colorado. "Rosie, get back here." Caleb grabbed her arm. "You stay right behind me, you understand?" She just nodded, her little chin trembling. Caleb held her close and started pushing through the crowd, his bad leg aching with every step. "That boy is a good worker, been with me 3 years. Eats next to nothing and never complains. Who will start me at $15? The crowd just shuffled their feet. "20?" a voice called out. It was a rancher Caleb had never seen before. $20, a fine start. "Do I hear 25? Caleb stopped a few feet from the boy. The kid was just shaking, his eyes looking at nothing. It was the same dead look Caleb saw on boys in the field hospitals back in the war. 30, Caleb said, his voice cutting through the cold air. Everyone turned to look. The man in the black coat squinted at him. Up close, a nasty scar ran down the man's cheek. $30 from the gentleman. "Who will give me 35? "I am not buying him," Caleb said, loud and clear for everyone to hear. "I am telling you to take that rope off him before I do." The air got real still and quiet. The scarred man just smiled. "This boy is my legal ward, friend. I have papers from a judge in Denver. I am his guardian, and I say what is best for him. Guardians do not sell children like livestock." "Who said anything about selling? I am finding him a good work home. The boy is starving," Caleb said, nodding at the kid. "When was the last time he ate a real meal? He eats just fine." But then Rosie slipped away from Caleb. She walked right up to that crate, pulled a peppermint stick out of her pocket, and held it up to the boy. "Here," she said, "it is peppermint. It is real good." The boy looked down at her, and for a second something flickered in his empty eyes. His raw, cracked fingers reached out slow and trembling, and he took the candy like it was treasure. "Rosie," Caleb said, his voice tight. "Come back here. He is cold, Daddy. He needs a coat." "I know, sweetheart. Now come back." But she did not move. She looked right at the scarred man and said, "You are mean to him. I can tell. He is scared of you." The man's smile vanished. "You had better teach your daughter some manners, Mackenzie. Now, if you are not here to bid, then move along. I have got business to do." "Your business here is over." "Says who?" "Says me." Caleb unhooked the leather strap on his pistol. He did not draw it, but he made sure everyone saw his hand was ready. "You are going to shoot me over some stray kid?" The man laughed. "Right here in front of your little girl? I am going to ask you one last time to take that rope off the boy. After that, I am done asking." The scarred man, Maury Slade, looked Caleb up and down. He saw the worn holster, the determined look in Caleb's eyes, and the slight limp that spoke of an old war. He knew this was a man who was not bluffing. Slade unwound the rope from his hand and let it fall. "I will be back for what is mine, Mackenzie," he said, his voice low and full of poison. Then he turned and walked over to two men waiting with horses. Caleb watched them ride off. The boy swayed on the crate, and Caleb caught him. The child felt like he was made of nothing but bones. "Daddy," Rosie said, tugging on his coat, "can we take him home with us?" "Rosie, it is not that simple." "Why not?" "Because—" Caleb trailed off. "Because it was dangerous. Because Slade meant what he said. Because I only have one good coat," Caleb finally said, "and now it is on him. So let us get inside before we all freeze solid." Clara Jennings, who kept house for them, had the door open before they even got to the porch. "Saw the whole thing from the window," she said, pulling them in. "Caleb Thornton, you are either the bravest man I know or the biggest fool." "Can I decide after I get warm?" Caleb asked. "Sit him by the stove, Rosie," Clara ordered. "Blankets are on the top shelf." Clara was already getting some broth on the stove while Caleb settled the boy into a chair. "You got a name, son?" Caleb asked gently. The boy just stared at the floor, gripping the chair like his life depended on it. "He does not have to talk," Clara said. "Just give him some time." "Time is what we might not have. Slade said he is coming back." "That Maury Slade is trouble," Clara said. "I have been hearing stories about his mine for 2 years now. Kids go to work there and they just do not come back out. But he has got money and friends in high places, so no one does a thing." "Well, somebody's doing something now," Caleb said. Clara looked at him real serious. "You have a 7-year-old daughter to think about, Caleb." "I am thinking about her," he said, nodding toward Rosie, who was wrapping a big wool blanket around the boy. "What kind of daddy would I be if I taught her to look the other way when something like this happens?" "I am Rosie," she said to the boy. "I am 7. That is my daddy, Caleb. We have a ranch with a dog named Biscuit. He is old and fat, and he will sleep on your feet to keep them warm." The boy just stared at her. "Do you like dogs?" Rosie asked. After a long moment, the boy whispered, "Never met one." "Never met a dog?" Rosie's eyes got wide. "Daddy, he has never even met a dog." "We have to fix that." "Biscuit will love you." A tiny little crack appeared in the boy's frozen face. It was not a smile, but it was a start. Clara brought a cup of broth. "Drink this slow," she said. "Your stomach is not used to it." The boy lifted the cup with shaking hands. He took one small sip, and his eyes closed. In that moment, all the emptiness was replaced by a pain so deep it made Caleb look away. "What is your name, son?" he asked again, his voice soft. The boy opened his eyes and looked at Caleb, model. Caleb glanced from the boy to his daughter, Rosie, and then to Clara. He could see the gears turning in the boy's head, the same kind of worried math every hurt child has to do. "Is this safe? How long will it last? What will it cost me?" The boy whispered his name. "Noah. Noah Ward. A good, strong name." The boy's hand shook around the cup. "That man, Mr. Slade, he'll come looking for me. He always does. He's got papers, legal ones, that say I belong to him. Son, nobody owns another person. The judge says otherwise." "Well, the judge is a fool, then." Noah just shook his head. "You don't get it. He has 22 other children up there. If he gets mad at you, he'll take it out on them." "On my—" He stopped himself, his eyes dropping to the floor. "He hurts the others." Caleb caught that slip. The word Noah almost said. "My brother? My sister?" It was someone important, someone he was protecting even now. "Noah, who else is still up there?" The boy's jaw clenched tight. "I can't tell. I can't. If he finds out I talked, he'll hurt them something awful." "All right," Caleb said, holding up his hands. "You don't have to say another word. Not now." The front door swung open, and in walked Dr. Agnes Whitfield. She had silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Noah, and her mouth set into a hard, thin line. Clara had sent a boy running for me 5 minutes ago. She put her bag on the table. Let me have a look at him. Doc, you gotta go easy. He's terrified. Caleb Thornton, I've been handling scared children since before you were born. Don't you tell me how to do my business. Agnes pulled a chair near Noah but didn't touch him. Son, my name is Dr. Whitfield. I'm just going to check for any hurts. You tell me to stop and I'll stop right then. You understand? Noah gave a tiny nod. The checkup took 15 minutes. Agnes was careful, but with every piece of clothing she moved, her face got colder. Caleb watched from the window. When she was done, she helped Noah with his shirt and pulled Caleb outside. How bad is it? Agnes's voice was like ice. He has 3 ribs that healed wrong. Old rope burns on his wrists. I counted 37 lash marks on his back. His feet are burned. And Caleb, someone tried to choke that boy in the last week. The handprints are still there. You got all this down? I started the moment I walked through that door. I'll have 12 pages of notes. If this gets to a judge with any sense of right and wrong, Slade is finished. And what if the judge doesn't have a conscience? Then Lord help every last one of us. They went back inside. Noah was done with his broth. Rosie had wiggled off Clara's lap and was now sitting right next to him. She was telling him all about her dog, Biscuit, the ranch, and that Christmas was coming soon. Do you know about Christmas? Rosie asked him. I've heard of it. But do you know about presents? No. Daddy gets me one every year. This year I'm asking for something special. What's that? Rosie looked straight at her father, then turned back to Noah. A brother. The room went dead silent. Clara's hand froze mid-stir. Agnes looked over her glasses. Caleb felt something shift inside his chest, like ice cracking on a river in spring. Noah just stared at Rosie. You don't want me? I'm just trouble. Mr. Slade always said so. He'd always. Said it's why my own folks left me. Mr. Slade is a liar, Rosie said flatly. Daddy says liars are bad people. Your daddy don't know. My daddy knows everything. Don't you, Daddy? Caleb looked at his 7-year-old girl, who had her mother's stubborn chin and fierce heart. Then he looked at Noah, a child who'd been treated worse than an animal. He felt that old wall inside him, the one he'd built after his wife Martha passed. Don't get close. Don't love anyone else. It only leads to hurt. But then he heard Martha's voice in his head telling him what he needed to hear. You don't have to be perfect, Caleb. You just have to be there. No, baby girl, Caleb said softly. I don't know everything. But I know you are not trouble, Noah. And I know that man had no business laying a hand on you. And I know for sure you are coming home with us. Noah's cup dropped to the table with a clatter. What? You heard me. But Slade, you let me handle Slade. He's got men and guns and the law on his side. And I've got a warm bed and a dog that'll keep your feet from getting cold, Caleb said, holding out his hand. Is that enough for tonight? Noah just stared at that hand. Caleb could see the fear in his eyes. Every hand ever offered to this boy had come with a price. Rosie put her little hand right on top of her daddy's. We're nice folks. I promise. Daddy burns the biscuits sometimes, but we're nice. I don't burn them that much, Caleb grumbled. You burned them just yesterday. That was one time. And Tuesday, that old stove just runs hot. From across the room, Clara snorted. That stove works just fine. You just can't cook worth a lick. And right then, something small happened. The corner of Noah's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, not even close. But it was a crack in the fortress he'd built around himself. He reached out and placed his small, cold hand in Caleb's. Caleb wrapped his hand around it, feeling the fragile bones and the pulse beating fast like a trapped bird. All right then, Caleb said. Let's head on home. Clara already had a bundle ready, a coat, boots, and a hat from the donation box she kept. She dressed Noah with practiced hands. This coat will keep you plenty warm. The boots might be a little big, but we can fix that. Noah accepted each piece like it was treasure. When Clara buttoned up the coat, the boy's eyes welled up with tears. He fought them back. Nobody's ever... His voice cracked. Well, Somebody is now, Clara said, straightening his collar. And if that snake Slade comes knocking, he'll meet my cast-iron skillet. You can tell him I said so. Agnes gave Caleb a piece of paper. My first report. What you're doing is the right thing, Caleb, but this is about to get real ugly. It's already ugly, Agnes. It's fixin' to get worse. Slade won't back down. Neither will I. They stepped out into the biting cold. Fresh snow was falling, covering the tracks where Slade had been. Caleb lifted Rosie into the wagon and then turned to Noah. The boy stood on the porch, staring at the wagon like it was a ship to a new world, one where people were kind. Can you climb up? Noah tried, but his legs gave out. Caleb caught him and lifted him onto the seat next to Rosie. The boy weighed next to nothing. Rosie tucked the blanket over both of them. Biscuit is going to love you, she said. I've never had a dog before. Well, you do now, Caleb said, taking the reins. He clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward, leaving the town behind. They rode in silence for a good while, the prairie stretching out white and quiet. Noah sat straight as a board, his eyes scanning the dark horizon like a hunted deer. Noah. Yes, sir. You don't need to call me, sir. What should I call you? Caleb will do just fine for now. Yes, Caleb. The wagon creaked as the snow got deeper. Caleb. Yeah? That man, Slade, he's going to come for me. I know it. He won't be by himself. I know that too. And he has those legal papers, signed by a judge. You can't fight the law. Watch me. Noah was quiet again, his hands twisting the edge of the blanket. Then, so quiet Caleb almost missed it, he whispered, I have a brother. Caleb's hands tightened on the leather reins. Tell me about him. His name is Eli. He's 13. He's still at that mine. We will get him back. You can't promise that. I just did. Caleb turned and looked at the boy with snow in his hair and fear in his eyes. I just did. I've lost folks I should have stood up for. I swore to myself that would never happen again. We're getting your brother back. You have my word on it. Noah looked deep into his eyes, hunting for the trick, the lie that always followed. He found nothing. The boy looked back at the road, his hand slowly reaching for Rosie's. She took it, weaving her fingers into his like they'd done it 1,000 times. The three of them rode on, tied together by a promise made in a single moment. Behind them, the town of Burden Creek vanished in the snow. Up ahead, the ranch was waiting. And somewhere in those mountains, a 13-year-old boy named Eli was still alive in a dark mine. Caleb wasn't sure he could keep his word. He didn't know if the law would be a help or a hindrance. He didn't know if Slade would show up with lawyers or with guns. But his little girl was holding a stranger's hand like he was kin. And a boy who had given up on hope had just trusted him with a name. That was more than enough to start. The ranch appeared as the last bit of light left the sky. Caleb stopped the wagon and helped Rosie down. She took off running, shouting for Biscuit. The old dog came ambling around the cabin, slow and fat, his tail wagging steady. He made a line for Rosie, but then a new smell stopped him. He planted his feet in front of the wagon and stared up at Noah like he was on official business. Noah just sat there, looking at the house and the barn, at the smoke curling from the chimney. He looked like a man about to die of thirst who'd just been shown a river, but couldn't believe it was real. That's Biscuit, Rosie said. He won't bite you. He ain't got enough teeth left. He's got plenty of teeth, Caleb corrected. He just saves them for pine cones. Caleb reached up a hand. Come on down, son, before we turn into ice. Noah climbed down, his legs giving out a little when he landed. Caleb caught him. Biscuit padded over and pushed his wet nose right into Noah's hand. The boy flinched, then went still. Ever so slowly, his hand opened, and he touched the dog's head. Biscuit gave his wrist a lick. Noah jerked his hand back. He licked me. Well, that means he likes you, Rosie said. Why? Because you're a good fella. Come on, I'll show you the house. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the cabin door. Caleb watched them go. Rosie, half the boy's size, but with all the confidence in the world. She was her mother's daughter for sure. He took his time unhitching and feeding the horses, giving Noah a moment to settle in before he came inside with all his questions. When he finally walked in, the cabin was warm. Rosie had the fire built back up, a skill he'd taught her last winter. She was on the floor with Biscuit's head in her lap, talking to Noah, who stood in the middle of the room just looking around. "That's Daddy's chair. That one's mine. You can sit in Mama's chair. She's up in heaven, so she ain't using it." Noah stopped his turning. "My mama died when I was born. Daddy says she was the best person he ever met. My mama died too. I was 5. Rosie nodded, real serious. "Does it still hurt?" "I can't remember her face enough for it to hurt." "I think that's worse," Rosie said, scratching Biscuit's floppy ear. "Daddy tells me stories about mine. He says her laugh was loud and she burned cornbread something awful." "I heard that," Caleb said from the doorway. "Your mama was a fine cook. It was Clara who said she burned everything." "Clara's got a big mouth," Caleb said, hanging his coat. He turned to the stove. "Noah, you hungry?" The boy's whole body went on alert. "I don't need much. I can eat whatever you got left over, or nothing at all. I ate at the lady's house." "That was just broth, not a real meal," Caleb said, grabbing a skillet. "I'm making bacon and eggs, and you're gonna eat. That ain't a request." "Yes, sir." "What did I tell you about that?" "Sorry." "Yes, Caleb. Better." Rosie started setting the table with 3 plates. She stood back and counted on her fingers. "1 for Daddy, 1 for me, and 1 for Noah. That makes 3. We've never had 3 before." The words just hung there in the little cabin. Caleb cracked eggs into the hot pan, his back to them. He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. They ate at the table. Noah sat in Martha's chair. The boy ate just like before, slow and careful, like he was rationing every single bite. "You don't have to eat like that," Rosie said. "There's more. Daddy's got chickens. They make eggs every day." Noah looked up at Caleb. "Every day. Every single day." Something in the boy's face changed then. He was seeing a world he'd forgotten existed, one where food wasn't scarce. "Noah," Caleb said, putting his fork down, "I'm not going to push you for answers tonight. But I want you to know one thing. Whatever you decide to tell me, I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to help you. That is not going to change." Noah just looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod and went back to his plate. After they ate, Rosie showed Noah where he'd sleep in the loft. Caleb could hear her little voice up there, explaining the blankets and the warm spot by the chimney. "If you get scared in the night," she said, "just call for Daddy. He always comes." "I don't get scared. Everybody gets scared, Buddy. Daddy does too." "No, he doesn't. He does so. He just doesn't let on. That's what being brave is. Being scared and doing it anyway." Then there was a quiet spell before Noah's voice came back, small and thin. "I'm scared all the time." "That's all right," Rosie said. "That just means you're the bravest person I know." Downstairs, Caleb sat at the table and just breathed. His 7-year-old girl understood things it had taken him 38 years to figure out. He checked the rifle over the door. It was loaded. He checked the revolver on the table. Loaded. He bolted the door and checked the back window. Then he poured a whiskey and sat in the dark, listening to the sound of children sleeping. Slade would be coming. A man like that didn't run on anger. He ran on cold calculation. That made him a whole lot more dangerous. Caleb knew he needed help, and he needed it fast. He finished his drink, checked the locks again, and climbed the ladder to the loft. Noah was curled up in the corner, his eyes wide open in the dark, just like when Caleb had found him. "Can't sleep," Noah said. "I don't sleep much. Mind if I sit a spell?" Noah gave a little shrug. Caleb sat down on the floorboards. Rosie was sleeping just a few feet away, spread out like a starfish. "She always sleep like that?" Noah asked. "Since she was a baby. Takes up the whole bed." A flicker of a smile touched Noah's face, but it was gone as fast as it came. Caleb? Yeah, son. What if Slade brings the sheriff? Then we'll deal with the sheriff. What if the sheriff is on his side? Then we go over his head. What if everyone is on his side? Caleb looked that boy right in the eye. Then it's just us. And that'll be enough. How can you know that? You don't know what he's like. Then you'll have to tell me. Noah was quiet for a long time. Not tonight, he finally whispered. I can't. All right. Not tonight. But Caleb, my brother Eli, he's the reason I got away. He picked a fight with the biggest guard they had. He took a bad beating so I could get through the fence. I could hear his ribs snapping. I heard him yelling, but I just kept on running. Caleb felt his own chest tighten. You did exactly what he wanted. I ran out on him. You got away. That's what he was fighting for. But what if he's dead? Or what if he's alive, just waiting for someone to come get him? Noah's breath caught in his throat. He pulled the blanket up tighter. He's tough, a whole lot tougher than me. He did 3 days in the hole once, walked out singing a song just to get under Slade's skin. Eli never let Slade see him hurt. That's why Slade hated him so much. He could never break him. Sounds like the kind of man I'd want by my side. He's the best man I know. He gave me his own food when I was too sick to work. Covered my shifts in the tunnel when I couldn't even stand. For 4 years, he kept me alive. Well then, we owe him. And I always pay my debts. Noah looked hard at Caleb in the dim light. Those brown eyes were still watchful, still figuring things out, but there was something new behind them. A little crack in his wall. Nobody's ever come for us before. We waited. That first year, we figured somebody would notice. Somebody would care. But nobody ever did. I care. Why? We're just a couple of kids nobody ever wanted. My sister Annabelle was a kid nobody wanted. The words just tumbled out of Caleb's mouth. He hadn't spoken of her in years. My own father sold her to some fellow when she was just 10 years old. Sold her off like she was cattle. I was 12 and too small to do a thing about it. I spent 15 years of my life looking for her. Never did find her. Noah sat up straight. Is she dead? I don't know. And that's the worst part of it. The not knowing. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder if she's out there somewhere. Maybe she's all grown up with a family of her own, or maybe she didn't make it, and I'll never know because I was too little and too scared to save her. You were 12, Noah said quietly. They sat there without a word. The fire popped and hissed down below. The wind pushed against the little cabin. Is that why you helped me? Noah finally asked. Because of her. Partly because of her. And maybe because of a lot of other folks I couldn't save. Caleb paused for a moment. And because my daughter looked at me with her mama's eyes and asked me to bring you home. I couldn't ever say no to Martha either. You must have loved her a whole lot. More than anything in this world, except for Rosie. And some days, missing her feels like it's going to split me right in two. Does it ever get easier? No, but you get stronger, strong enough to carry it. Noah didn't say anything for a good long while. Then he pulled the blanket right up to his chin. Caleb, yeah, thank you. For the coat and the food and this bed. You don't need to thank me for things a boy ought to have, I know, but nobody else ever gave them to me, so thank you. Caleb sat there until he heard Noah's breathing get steady and slow. Then he climbed back down the ladder, his tired legs aching, and sat in his chair by the cold stove. He didn't sleep a wink. The sun came up gray and bitter cold. Caleb had a fire going and coffee boiling before the first light hit the windows. He was frying up some bacon when he heard a horse coming. He reached for his rifle. It was just one rider, coming from town. He eased up a bit when he saw it was Reverend James Calloway's horse. The Reverend was 60 years old with white hair and a straight back. He wore the Union blue before he wore the cloth, and some days you could still see the soldier in his eyes. Morning, James. Morning, Caleb. Heard you had yourself a time yesterday. News gets around quick. Clara sent her boy over to my place for sundown. Told me the whole story. Calloway tied up his horse and followed Caleb inside. Where's the boy? He's sleeping. First real sleep he's had in years, from the looks of him. Calloway took the coffee and sat down. His eyes were dead serious. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the worst of people and somehow still believed in a higher power. Caleb, you realize what you've done, don't you? I do. Slade has friends in Denver. Judge Harlan is the one who signed those papers. If Slade takes this to the law, you could lose everything. You could go to jail. He was selling that boy on the street, James. Had a rope round him, calling out prices. Calloway's coffee cup stopped right in front of his lips, selling him like a horse at auction. 30 people just stood there and watched. Nobody did a single thing. The Reverend put his cup down real slow. Who saw it happen? Half the town. And would they testify? Would they want to cross a man with money and guns? Some of them might, if the right person asked them. And who might that be? Their pastor. Calloway's jaw was set like stone. I'll speak to every single one of them. And I'm going to write a letter to Federal Marshal Wade Prescott in Denver. I served with his father. He'll listen. What about Judge Harlan? Harlan's just a politician. He goes whichever way the wind is blowing. If we can make enough noise, that wind might just start blowing our way. We heard footsteps on the ladder. Noah climbed down wearing the clothes Clara gave him, his hair all sticking up. He saw Calloway and he just froze solid. It's all right, Caleb said. This here's Reverend Calloway. He's a friend. The Reverend didn't get up or move toward him. He just gave a little nod from his chair. Morning, Noah. Heard you're staying with Caleb and Rosie for a spell. Noah looked over at Caleb, who nodded back. The boy slowly moved to the table and sat. His eyes never left the preacher. Are you a real preacher? Noah asked. For 30 years now. We had a preacher come to the mine one time. Mr. Slade brought him in to show everyone how good we were being treated. That preacher said we were blessed. Said hard work was God's way. Calloway's face turned hard as a rock. That man wasn't a preacher. He was a liar using God's name for his own reasons. How do I know you're any different? You don't. Not yet. But I'll prove it to you. The same way Caleb has proven it. One day at a time. Noah thought about that. Then he reached for a piece of bacon. Caleb noticed the boy's hands weren't shaking as bad as they were yesterday. Then Rosie came storming down the ladder. She hugged Caleb, waved at the Reverend, and sat right down next to Noah like he'd been there his whole life. Did you sleep good? Better than I have in a long time. See? I told you it was warm up there. It is warm. Did Biscuit snore? He snores real loud. I didn't hear a thing. Then you must have slept real good, because Biscuit snores louder than Daddy. I do not snore, Caleb said. You sure do, Daddy. You make the walls shake. Calloway hid a little smile behind his coffee cup. Noah just watched them all, like he was seeing a show in a language he was just starting to understand. The teasing, the kindness, the easy way they all were with each other. After they ate, Calloway pulled Caleb out on the porch. I'll ride to Denver this week and talk to the marshal myself, but Caleb, you need to be ready. Slade ain't gonna wait for the law. I know. Keep that rifle handy. Been doing that since 1862. One more thing. Calloway stopped for a second. That boy, he's holding something back. I can see it in his eyes, his brother Eli. He's still at the mine. It's more than that. Something he's not ready to say yet. Don't you push him, but be ready when he is. It ain't right what they did to that boy. A man's got to stand for something, and that day Caleb stood for a boy named Noah. It's a story about how one person, standing firm, can turn the tide against pure evil. Ask yourself what you'd do. Later that day, Agnes showed up. She didn't bother knocking, just walked right in and dropped her bag on the table, handing Caleb a sealed letter. It's all in there, she said, her voice hard as iron. I've seen some bad things in 15 years, but this is the worst. 37 lashes, broken ribs, burns on his feet. The boy was starved, near to his last breath. Caleb's hands tightened. Will it be enough for a judge? Agnes looked him square in the eye. Any judge with a soul will see it, and if he can't, I'll make him. She glanced over at Noah, who was sitting with Rosie. Caleb, those scars on his back are the easy part. He eats like he's afraid the food will disappear. He never turns his back on a door. That boy needs patience. He needs to feel safe. Caleb nodded slowly. He'll get it. And when Slade shows up, he'll get something else entirely. Agnes gave a grim nod. Martha always said you were the most stubborn man she ever knew. A flicker of a smile touched Caleb's face. Second most. She was first. Agnes left with a promise to be back in a couple of days to check on Noah's ribs. Caleb took her report and put it in a lockbox under the floor. With the $83 and the deed to the ranch, those 12 pages were the most valuable thing he owned. They could either save a life or start a war. The rest of the day was quiet. Noah did his chores without being told, moving with a quiet purpose that spoke of a long, hard history. He fed the chickens, watching them scratch in the dirt with a curious look. "Ever been around chickens?" Caleb asked. Noah shook his head. "They're funny. They don't know it, which makes them funnier." A small smile, barely there, touched the boy's lips. Later on, Rosie took Noah out to the barn to meet the horses. Caleb watched from the corral fence as his daughter made the introductions. "This here is Copper. He's Daddy's horse and a real grump. This is Penny. She's mine. And this one is Ghost." Noah reached out a careful hand toward the white mare. She sniffed his fingers, then let out a soft puff of warm air. "See? She likes you," Rosie said, all proud. "Animals always know." Noah gently stroked the horse's long face, his hand steady for the first time. The simple trust of the animal seemed to calm a deep hurt inside him that words couldn't reach. "Caleb," Noah said, his voice quiet. "There's something I gotta tell you." Caleb felt a cold knot form in his gut. "I'm listening." Noah's voice was flat, like he was talking about the weather. "At the mine, they used the real little kids for the tight spaces, the ones I couldn't even fit in." He kept stroking Ghost's nose. "There's a girl, Sadie. She's 7, same as Rosie." Rosie froze beside him. "Eli, he watches out for her, the way he watched out for me. If Slade finds out I told you about this, he won't come for me. He'll go after them. That's how he keeps everyone quiet." The only sound in the barn was the soft breathing of the horses. "Noah," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "Look at me." The boy turned, his eyes old and dry. "We're going to get him out. Eli, Sadie, all of them. That's not a wish, son. That's the plan." Noah stared at him. "You're just one man." "I'm one man with a limp, a rifle, and a whole lot of good people who are about to get real mad." Noah seemed to weigh his words, then gave a single slow nod. "Okay." That night, Caleb sat at his table and wrote 3 letters. The first went to Marshall Prescott to back up whatever Calloway told him. The second went to a lawyer in Denver. And the third went to Clara Jennings, asking her to rally the folks in town who saw what Slade tried to do. He set the sealed letters by the door. Tomorrow the fight would truly begin. Later he heard a soft sound from the loft. It was Noah crying in his sleep. Small, choked-off sounds like he was trying to hide the pain, even in his dreams. Caleb climbed the ladder to the loft. The boy was curled up tight, and Rosie was next to him, rubbing his back in slow circles. "He keeps saying a name," she whispered. "Eli." Caleb sat on the other side of the boy and put a hand on his shoulder. Slowly the whimpering stopped and Noah's breathing evened out. "Daddy," Rosie whispered in the dark. "We have to get his brother." "We will," Caleb promised. "I promise." Rosie lay back down, her hand still resting on Noah's back. "He cries every night, Daddy. I hear him. I think getting Eli home is the only thing that'll make it stop." Caleb stayed there for a long time, sitting between the 2 children, the weight of his promise settling heavy on his shoulders. 3 days later, Slade made his move. Caleb was out back splitting firewood when he heard the wagon wheels. He set down the axe and picked up the rifle he kept nearby. Noah, Rosie, get inside now. Noah was at the well and didn't hesitate. He grabbed Rosie's hand and they vanished into the cabin. The boy knew the sound of trouble coming. Caleb rounded the house just as two wagons pulled up. The first carried Slade, looking smug in his black coat, flanked by his hired guns, Virgil Hobbs and Dutch Perry. The second wagon held a small man in a city suit who looked mighty out of place. This man held up a piece of paper. Caleb Martin, I am Judge Elias Thorne. I have a writ here for the return of my client's property, the boy known as Noah. Caleb's jaw tightened. That boy ain't property. The law says otherwise, the judge said smoothly. Now you can hand him over peacefully, or these deputies can take him by force. It was a trap, plain and simple. It was a cold December morning when the wagon pulled up. A man in a suit sat stiffly inside, holding a leather case on his lap like it was a bomb. He looked like he'd rather be wrestling a bobcat. Slade climbed down first, taking his sweet time. Well, now, morning, Mackenzie. Get off my property. That ain't a very neighborly way to greet a man who came to settle things. Slade pointed to the suit. This here is Mr. Leland Cross. He's an attorney. He has papers for you, signed by Judge Harland all the way from Denver. It is a legal custody order. The lawyer eased himself down from the wagon and walked toward Caleb, his hands shaking a bit. Mr. Mackenzie, I have a court order that says you have to turn over the child, Noah Ward, to his guardian, Mr. Morai Slade. If you do not, that's kidnapping under the law. I know what the law says. Then you understand I have to. I understand you are on my land with a man who hurts children. I understand you rode 40 miles in the freezing cold to drag a 9-year-old boy back to a mine where he has been treated worse than an animal for 4 years. I understand all of that just fine. Now you need to understand something. Caleb's voice got low and quiet. That boy is not going anywhere. Slade just smiled. Did you hear that, Mr. Cross? The man just defied a court order right in front of us. I do believe that is a crime. Mr. Mackenzie, the lawyer's voice trembled. Please, sir, I do not want any trouble. All you have to do is give us the boy. You do not want trouble? Then why did you ride out here with a man who throws children in dark holes, with a man who takes a whip to a 9-year-old until his back looks like raw meat? The lawyer turned white as a sheet. He glanced over at Slade. But Slade's smile never flickered. The boy just has a wild imagination. You know how children can be, always making up tall tales. I have seen the scars with my own 2 eyes. It is a working mind. Children get scrapes and bruises. It is just part of the business. Your business is owning people. My business is perfectly legal, and the court says so. That is a whole lot more than I can say for what you are doing out here. Just then, the cabin door creaked open. Caleb did not turn around, but he heard the small footsteps. Noah's. Noah, you get back inside right now. No. The boy's voice was shaky, but it was firm. He walked right past Caleb and planted himself between him and Slade. He was trembling from head to toe, but he held his chin high. I am not going back with you, Mr. Slade. Slade's smile twisted into something mean and cold. Is that a fact, boy? I told them what you did. I told them about Samuel and Daniel and all the others. You told them a bunch of lies. I told them the truth, and I will tell it to a judge, too. Slade took a step toward him. Caleb moved. Right back between them, his rifle held steady. That is close enough. You are making a bad mistake here, Mackenzie, a very big one. I have got the law on my side. I have got witnesses. And I have got a judge in Denver who will see you in shackles before Christmas Day. And I have got a doctor's report that counts 37 whip marks on the back of a 9-year-old boy. I have got a preacher on his way to Denver this very minute to speak with a federal marshal. And I have got a whole town full of folks who watched you try to sell that child on the street just 3 days ago. For just a second, a flicker of worry crossed Slade's face. He covered it up quick. Nobody in that town is going to say a word against me. Are you sure about that? The people in this town know better than to cross me. The people in this town watched you put a rope on a boy and auction him off. You think they are going to forget that? You think their wives are going to let them? On the wagon, a man named Virgil Hobbs started to reach for his rifle. Caleb saw it. "Tell your man to keep his hands right where I can see them. Virgil is just getting comfortable." Virgil can get comfortable with his hands on his knees, or he can get comfortable in the dirt. It is his choice. Hobbs looked to Slade, who gave a little nod. Hobbs put his hands right back on his knees. The lawyer spoke up. "Mr. Mackenzie, no matter what you are claiming, this court order is still valid. If you have proof of abuse, you need to file a petition with the court. Already done." The lawyer blinked. "I'm sorry," I said. "It is already done. Filed it yesterday. A counter-petition for emergency custody. It has got medical proof, eyewitnesses, and a request for a federal investigation. You want to see the copies? I have got them right inside." That was a pure bluff. The letters were written, but they were still sitting on his kitchen table, sealed up and waiting for the preacher to take them. But Slade had no way of knowing that. And the lawyer sure did not. Slade looked at Caleb, really looked at him. You could see the wheels turning in his head, weighing his chances. This was not the simple rancher he was expecting to roll over. Slade finally spoke. "Let me make this real simple for you. I came here today to do this peaceful. I brought papers and a lawyer, everything by the book. You want to fight this in court? That is fine by me. But you need to understand something." He leaned in a little. "I have been running that mine for 6 years. I have had people ask questions before, marshals, newspapermen, do-gooders like you, and every single one of them went away. Some of them just changed their minds, some had to be persuaded, and some of them just vanished. Is that a threat? That is history. I'm just telling you how this is going to go. No, let me tell you how this is going to go." Caleb stepped closer, so close he could see the stitch marks in Slade's scar. "You have got 22 children in that mine, I know it. The doctor knows it, the preacher knows it, and by the end of this week, a federal marshal is going to know it too. You can bring your threats, you can bring your lawyers, you can bring your guns, but you are not taking this boy. Not now, not ever. You are just one man. I am one man with nothing left to lose. You ought to think long and hard about how dangerous that makes a person." Slade's jaw clenched up tight. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Slade turned to his lawyer. "Mr. Cross, please make a note that Mr. Mackenzie has refused to obey a valid court order. Note the date and the time." "Noted," the lawyer squeaked. Slade looked at Noah, who was still standing his ground, his little fists balled up. "I will be seeing you soon, boy. Real soon." Noah's voice came out strong and clear. "You do not scare me anymore." For just a second, a nasty look crossed Slade's face. Then it was gone. He climbed back onto the wagon. "1 week, Mackenzie," Slade hollered over his shoulder. "The judge set a hearing for December 21st. That is 1 week from today. You be there with that boy, or I will come back for him myself. And I promise you, next time I will not be bringing a lawyer." The wagons rolled off until they were just tiny dots against the snow. Caleb finally let out a long breath and lowered his rifle. Noah was still standing right where he had been, but now he was shaking all over. "You should not have come out here," Caleb said softly. "I had to." "Why is that?" "Because if I hide from him now, I will be hiding from him for the rest of my life. And I am done with hiding." Caleb looked down at this little boy, all of 9 years old, talking like a grown man planting his flag in the ground. "That was a brave thing you did, son. It did not feel brave. It felt like I was about to be sick." Caleb smiled a little. "That is exactly what brave feels like." The cabin doors swung open and Rosie ran out, throwing her arms around Noah. "I heard it all. He is a monster. He is the worst man in the whole wide world. He is coming back for me, Rosie. Then we will just have to be ready for him." Noah looked up at Caleb. 1 week. That is not a lot of time. Then we better not waste a minute of it." Caleb rode into town that afternoon, leaving the children with a loaded rifle and a prayer they would not have to use it. At the telegraph office, he sent two messages. One went to Calloway over in Denver. The other went to Samuel Graves, the lawyer Agnes pointed him to. The fella at the telegraph office read them back, his eyes wide as dinner plates. Are you really fixin' to go after Morai Slade? Caleb just looked at him. I am. He stopped by Clara's place next. She was waiting on the porch like she knew he was coming. He showed up this morning, Caleb told her. Brought a lawyer and a court order. Clara crossed her arms. What do you need from me? Witnesses, Caleb said. I need every soul who was at that market when Slade put Noah on that crate. I need every person who saw the rope and did nothing. It is time for them to do something. Some of them are too scared to talk. They ought to be scared. Scared of what happens if Slade gets away with this. Clara, there is a 7-year-old girl in that mine, same age as our Rosie. Her face changed. Noah told me. Her name is Sadie. She works the tunnels that are too small for the other kids. Clara's knuckles turned white on the porch rail. I will get your witnesses. And God help the man who tells me no. Agnes was in her office when he knocked. She let him in and poured coffee that tasted like boiled boot leather. Slade paid my ranch a visit. I know, she said. I need you to testify in front of Judge Harland in Denver. The date is December 21st. Agnes gave no hesitation. I will be there. Then she leaned forward. Caleb, I did some digging. In the 6 years Slade's mine has been open, not one child has ever been seen leaving that place. They go in, but they do not come out. That means he is either keeping them forever, or they are buried on that mountain. I want to see that site. If there are graves, I can document them. Medical proof will tear up any guardianship paper Slade ever made. You would have to get by Slade's men, then get me by them. Caleb stared at this 55-year-old woman with her silver hair and steady hands, ready to march into a guarded camp to find children's graves. Martha would have liked you. Martha did like me, Agnes said softly. We had tea every Thursday. You never knew. She told me things she never told you. That is what women do, Caleb. We carry the parts that are too heavy for you. He rode for home as the dark settled in. The cold cut right through his coat, but his mind was busy, laying out a plan. He was about a mile out when he saw it, an orange glow lighting up the night sky. Not the cabin. Thank God. It was the barn. Flames were crawling up the side, pouring smoke into the cold air. Caleb kicked his horse hard, the animal bolting through the snow. He could hear the horses screaming inside. Then he heard Rosie's voice, terrified, shouting his name. He was off his horse before it even stopped. Daddy. Rosie ran from the cabin door. The barn is on fire. Noah went in there. He went to get the horses. Caleb's heart just stopped. He said he had to save them. I tried to stop him. Caleb ran. The heat hit him 20 feet away. Inside, he heard Noah coughing and the frantic sounds of the horses. He pulled his bandana over his face and went in. The smoke was a thick, blinding fog. He could hear Noah's voice, raw and desperate. Come on, girl. Move. Caleb followed the sound and found him in Ghost's stall, pulling on the terrified mare. The boy was leaning back with all his might, but the horse was planted, wild-eyed, and not moving an inch. Noah, get out now. I will handle this. She will not move, I said. Get out. I am not leaving her. There was no time to argue. Caleb grabbed the halter and pulled with a strength born of pure desperation. A beam cracked right above them. Noah threw himself over the horse's neck, shielding her with his own small body. Please move. And just like that, the horse moved. They burst out of the smoke and into the freezing night. He saw that Copper and Penny were already out. Rosie had opened their stalls while Noah went for Ghost. His 7-year-old daughter had walked into a burning barn. They all just stood in the yard and watched the barn collapse on itself. There was nothing they could do. Noah was on his knees, choking on smoke. Caleb knelt beside him. Are you okay? Yeah, the boy coughed out. The horses are safe, thanks to you, and to Rosie. Caleb put a hand on his back. That was a foolish thing to do, Noah. You did the same thing. I am a grown man. That does not make it any less foolish. Caleb almost smiled. Then his eyes caught something in the snow. Boot prints. 2 sets of them, leading away from the barn and south toward town. He looked at Noah. I see them. This was not an accident. No. Rosie was by the horses, her arms wrapped around Penny's neck. Daddy, somebody did this on purpose. Yeah, baby. Somebody did. Mr. Slade. Caleb did not have to answer. They all knew. Noah got to his feet. The firelight flickered across his face. And what Caleb saw there was not fear. It was a cold, hard rage, the kind of anger that grows in a child who has been hurt one too many times and has finally found something worth fighting for. He thinks he can scare us, Noah said. He is wrong. Messages. Caleb stood up tall. Noah, you listen to me. This is what that man does. He pushes and he pushes until good people break. He finds what you care about most, and he tries to destroy it until you have got nothing left, and then you give him what he wants. That is his game. It has worked on everyone else before. Well, it is not going to work on me. How can you be so sure? Because I have already lost everything a man can lose. My wife, my sister, my best friend. I have been all the way at the bottom, son. I have been to a place where there is nothing left for a man like him to take. And I am still here. Slade can burn down my barn. He can take every last cent I have, but he cannot make me quit. Noah stared at him. The anger was still in his eyes, but now there was something else, too. Something that looked a lot like hope. Caleb. Yes? I need to tell you something about the mine. Something I have never told another soul. I am listening. There is a tunnel. It is the deepest one they have, Shaft 7. That is where Slade keeps his books, his real books, ledgers with the names of every child who has ever been there. It has the dates. It has what happened to them. Noah's voice got quiet. And it has where he buried the ones who did not make it. Caleb stood there completely still. Are you sure about this, Noah? I have seen them. Eli showed me one time. It was a crime hidden in plain sight, a cruelty that had festered for 6 long years under the nose of a bought and paid for judge. But a young boy named Noah escaped that mine and brought the truth with him, written on his own bruised back. He'd told Caleb everything, even about the secret ledgers filled with names. Those books were the proof, the one thing that could bring the whole rotten business down. Now, standing by the fire with the snow falling soft and quiet, Caleb knew he couldn't turn away. This was about more than just one boy. It was about every child Slade had ever stolen. This was about doing what was right when the law wouldn't. His daughter Rosie took his hand. Daddy, she said, her voice small but sure. We're going to that mine, aren't we? Caleb looked at his 7-year-old girl and saw her mother's strength looking right back at him. Yes, baby, he said. We sure are. He left long before sunrise. After checking on the children, he saw Clara sitting in his late wife's rocking chair, a shotgun laid across her lap. She'd come from town with biscuits and a backbone of pure steel. You come back in one piece, Caleb Thornton, she said. I ain't planning on burying you. He just nodded. I plan on it. The cold out on the trail was the kind that settled deep in your bones. 2 miles south, Marshal Wade Prescott was waiting, just like the Reverend said he would be. He was a man of about 44, with a square jaw and eyes that looked like they could spot a lie from a mile away. He'd ridden hard from Denver with 4 deputies, bringing real law with him. Mackenzie, Prescott said, shaking Caleb's hand. Calloway told me what you found. That doctor's report on the boy was about the ugliest thing I've read in 20 years. He pulled a paper from his coat. If what that boy said is true, then Slade is a man living on borrowed time. This wasn't some local piece of paper. It was a federal warrant signed by Judge Crawford himself. This here overrides anything our good Judge Harlan has to say on the matter. Forced labor of children is a federal concern. For the first time in days, Caleb felt like he could finally breathe. When do we ride? He asked. Right now, Prescott said. I want to be on top of that mine before Slade even knows we're in the county. They pushed their horses hard, the 6 of them moving west as one. Noah had drawn a map on the back of his sister's schoolwork. He'd laid out every tunnel, every guard post, a perfect drawing of the prison he'd lived in. The main gate faces south, Caleb explained. But there's a supply road on the north side. Noah said it's barely guarded before dawn. How many men are we talking about? Prescott asked. Noah counted 6, including Slade. But he usually only keeps 3 at the mine. 6 of us against maybe 4 of them, Prescott mused. I've seen worse odds. They reached the ridge just as the sun started to bleed across the horizon. Down below, the mining camp was already stirring. Little figures, children, were hauling buckets and tools into the dark mouths of the mines. They moved like puppets, their spirits long since broken. One of the deputies swore under his breath. Caleb saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, stumble under the weight of a heavy bucket. A taller boy right behind her put a hand on her back to steady her. "That's Eli," Caleb said, his voice thick. "And the little girl must be Sadie." Prescott looked through his field glasses. "I see 2 guards. I don't see Slade." "Noah said he sleeps in the big tent on the east side," Caleb pointed. "All right," Prescott said, turning to his men. "Mitchell, Dalton, you take the front. Reeves, Garner, you circle around and cover the back entrance. Mackenzie, you're with me. We go for Slade first. You cut the head off the snake, the body stops moving." They moved down the snowy ridge like ghosts. At the main entrance, the young guard saw the federal badges and his rifle clattered to the ground. He was under arrest before he could even think to argue. Another guard tried to make a run for it, but was tackled into a snowbank. It was over in minutes. Prescott pulled back the flap to Slade's tent and went in low and fast, his pistol leading the way. Caleb was right behind him. It was Demia. Slade was sitting on his cot, pulling on his boots. He looked up, and his face was a flicker of surprise, then cold calculation, and then a flash of fear he couldn't quite hide. "Morai Slade," Prescott announced, his voice like iron. "You are under arrest by federal authority for a list of charges as long as my arm." Slade stood up slowly, his eyes finding Caleb. "Mackenzie, I should have dealt with you proper." "You should have left those children alone," Caleb shot back. "That boy was mine, legal-like," Slade growled. "Judge Crawford in Denver disagreed," Prescott said, snapping the irons onto Slade's wrists. "He voided every last one of your guardianship papers this morning. You don't have a legal claim to so much as a stray dog on this land." That's when the mask finally broke. The respectable businessman vanished, and all that was left was pure, ugly rage. Caleb walked out of the tent. He didn't need to see any more. The children were gathered in small, silent groups, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Caleb found the tall boy, Eli, who was still shielding his little sister Sadie with his body. "Eli," Caleb said gently. The boy flinched. "My name is Caleb Thornan. Your brother Noah is safe at my ranch. He sent me to bring y'all home." Eli stared, his eyes narrowed with a lifetime of suspicion. "You're lying," he whispered. "Noah's dead." "Slade is the one in handcuffs," Caleb said calmly. "He won't be telling any more lies." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully and held it out. It was a little wooden horse, crudely carved, no bigger than a man's thumb, the very thing Noah had given him that morning. A small, crudely carved horse. It was the kind of thing a boy might make with a stolen knife in the dark. Eli's tough expression crumbled. "Where did you get this?" "Noah said you carved it for him," Caleb said gently. "He said you told him it was a magic horse that would carry him away from here one day." Eli's hand trembled as he took the little horse. He turned it over, and 4 years of pain finally broke through. His knees gave out, and Caleb caught him. "He's alive," Eli whispered, his voice cracking. He sounded like a boy again, not the hard protector of the mines. Just a 13-year-old kid who thought his little brother was gone forever. "He's alive and safe," Caleb confirmed. "He's been eating real meals and sleeping in a warm bed. My daughter even taught him how to play checkers." Eli started sobbing, deep, ragged breaths. The little girl, Sadie, hugged him tight. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes holding an oldness no child should have. "Are we really leaving?" "Yes, sweetheart," Caleb said. "You're all leaving this place for good." Agnes arrived 2 hours later with a wagon full of medical supplies. She moved through the children with quiet purpose, checking each one, her jaw tight with anger. 17 children, she told Caleb later. The oldest is 14, the youngest is only 6. They are all malnourished, all abused. Then her face hardened. And the graves. We found them. I counted 9. 9 children in unmarked graves. 9 lives stolen in the dark. We will not know their names until we can excavate, Agnes said. But they found the ledgers. Shaft 7, right where Noah said they would be. 6 years of records, names, dates, and causes of death. Slade kept perfect records. To him, it was just a business. Caleb walked to the edge of the camp and looked out at the mountains, feeling the cold wind on his face. The fight was not over, but the war was about to be won. Model shown. Later, after the camp was secured, Caleb found Eli sitting by a shed with Sadie asleep in his lap. The boy's face was worn out from crying, but he clutched the wooden horse like a lifeline. "Eli," Caleb said, "it's time. We have wagons ready to take you and the other children to your brother." Eli looked up, his eyes full of doubt. "What about Slade? Men like him always get away." "Not this time," Caleb said firmly. "You don't know that. I know that a federal marshal, a doctor, and a whole town are making sure he never hurts another child. I know there are 9 graves out there that need answering for. And I know there are 23 children, starting with you, who are ready to stand up and tell the truth." Eli's jaw set, showing the same stubborn streak Caleb had seen in the mirror his whole life. This time, the good folks were going to win. "I'll speak. I'll tell them every last thing, every kid that died, every beating, every day spent in the hole. I'll tell them till they can't pretend they don't know anymore. That's what I was hoping for." The wagons left the mine around noon, 2 of them filled with children wrapped in every blanket Agnes and Clara could find. Prescott and his men rode alongside with Slade chained up in the back of a prison wagon. He wasn't talking anymore, wasn't making any threats. He just sat there staring at nothing, with the dead eyes of a man who knows the game is over. Caleb rode next to the children's wagon. Eli was sitting up front holding Sadie. The little girl was awake now, eating a biscuit just as careful as Noah would. Small, slow bites, like she was afraid it might disappear. "Mr. Thornton." "Caleb." Eli's voice was quiet. "What's Noah like now? Is he different? Different how?" "Well, when I knew him, he never said much. Didn't trust a soul. I never saw him smile. I used to tell him stories at night, just so he might feel safe for a little bit. But I could always tell he was listening for footsteps, always ready to run. He still carries some of that weight. Sleep doesn't come easy, and loud noises make him jump clean out of his skin. He eats every meal like it might be his last one." Caleb took a breath. "But yesterday, he laughed. My little girl told some silly joke about a chicken, and a real laugh came out of him. First time I ever heard it." Eli shut his eyes. He used to laugh at anything and everything before his mama passed. At bugs, clouds, the way our cat would sneeze. I thought that sound was gone forever. You will hear it again. "Tell me about your daughter, Rosie. She is 7 years old. She is a little bossy, talks a mile a minute, and thinks every stray critter is her own to save. She decided Noah was her brother about 30 seconds after they met. Is he coming around?" Eli went quiet. He held Sadie the way Noah held Rosie's hand, like letting go meant losing the whole world. "Caleb." "Yeah. Noah told me about Sadie. Said you look after her. Her folks are gone, both of them. Slade found her 8 months ago on a road near Pueblo, wandering barefoot and not even knowing her own last name." Eli's arm got tighter around the sleeping girl. First night at the camp, Slade put her in the smallest tunnel. She just screamed. For 6 hours straight, nobody could get to her. When they finally pulled her out, she went silent for 3 weeks. She is talking now, though. Took a good while. I just carried her everywhere, made sure she ate, and kept her close. Pretty soon she started whispering to me at night. First just whispers, then words, then whole sentences. Eli looked down at her. "She calls me her big brother. You are her big brother. She needs a proper family, not just some kid who can barely look after himself. She has one if you want it." Eli's head shot up. "What is that supposed to mean?" I mean that my ranch has a loft big enough for 4 kids. I mean, we have got chickens that lay eggs every morning and a dog that will sleep on your feet to keep them warm. I mean, my daughter has been praying for a bigger family since she was old enough to talk. You would take Sadie, too? I would take the whole lot of you, if that is what you want." Eli just stared at him. Caleb could see the wheels turning in his head. The same questions Noah always had. Is this for real? What is the catch? When does the kindness run out? Why? Eli finally asked. You do not owe us a thing. I owe your brother everything. He reminded me what it feels like to actually give a damn about something. For 5 years, I have just been sleepwalking, going through the motions, just trying to make it to the next sunrise. Noah woke me up. He was broken, but he was brave, just like you are. The wagons pushed on through the snow. Far behind them, the mine got smaller until it disappeared behind a ridge, just another scar on the land that time would eventually heal. They pulled into Burden Creek right at dusk, and it seemed like the entire town was there waiting. Folks lined the street, all quiet at first, just watching the wagons roll in. Then one person started clapping, then another, until the whole town erupted in cheers. Clara was there, and Reverend Calloway, Morrison from the general store, Miss Hayes, the school teacher, even Lahi from the saloon. Dozens of people Caleb hardly knew, all standing in the snow, clapping, and some of them crying. But Caleb was only looking for 2 faces. He found them on Clara's porch. Noah stood stiff as a board, gripping the railing, his eyes scanning the wagon. Rosie was right beside him, bouncing on the balls of her feet. The wagon came to a halt. Caleb helped Eli down. The boy's legs were shaking. Sadie clung to his neck, her face hidden in his shoulder. Noah came off that porch, slow at first, then faster, until he was running. Just running full tilt through the snow with his arms wide open, every wall he had ever built turning to dust. The brothers crashed into each other in the middle of the street. They went down in a heap in the snow, just holding on to each other. And the sound that came out of Eli was not crying, and it was not laughing. It was something else, something so raw and deep that our language has not made a word for it yet. You are alive, Eli kept saying over and over. You are alive. You are alive. I told you I would come back for you. Noah was sobbing into his brother's coat. I promised. You did not come back. You sent someone better. Noah pulled away and took in his brother's face, the swollen eye, the cut lip, all the bruises. He hurt you. I am okay. He hurt you because of me. He hurt me because he is a monster, not because of you. It was never because of you. Eli held Noah's face in his hands. You got out. That is all I ever wanted. You got out. Rosie had followed Noah from the porch. She stood a few feet away, watching them with tears just streaming down her face. Then she walked right up and put her hand on Eli's shoulder. Hi, I am Rosie. I am Noah's sister now, so I reckon that makes me your sister too. And that is Sadie on your back, and Daddy says she can stay with us too. So we are a family now. All of us. Eli looked down at this small, fierce girl with her rusty red curls and her mother's gray eyes, and her deep-down certainty that love was a choice you made, not a prize you won. Just like that, Caleb watched his family come together right there on a snow-dusted street, with the whole town looking on and shedding tears. 4 kids, 4 brave, broken little souls who found their way to each other. Agnes came up beside him. You know the hearing's still on for tomorrow. Slade's lawyer is raising a fuss, and Judge Harland is madder than a wet hen, saying Prescott had no right. But Prescott had a federal warrant. Harland don't care. He's claiming the warrant's no good and is threatening to let Slade walk. The hope in Caleb's chest turned to dust. Can he do that? He can sure try. But Caleb, we've got the ledgers, the pictures Agnes took, and 9 fresh graves. We have 17 living witnesses and a federal marshal who won't back down an inch. And Harlan's got his pride and 20 years on that bench. Then we better be ready to scrap for every last bit of ground. Caleb looked at the children, at Noah and Eli still clinging to each other, at Rosie kneeling beside them, holding Sadie close. He saw all the other children being welcomed into every open home in town. Agnes. Yeah. How loud does the truth have to holler before it can't be ignored? More than you'd think, she said, squeezing his arm. Get some sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow's going to be a long one. He gathered his children, all 4 of them, and loaded them into the wagon. He wrapped them in blankets for the quiet ride home. Eli held Noah and Rosie held Sadie. At the cabin, Caleb carried Sadie inside. She was as light as a feather. He laid her in the loft next to Rosie. Eli and Noah climbed up, and Caleb could hear them whispering in the dark, brothers making up for 4 lost years. He sat at the kitchen table, feeling the emptiness he'd known for 5 years finally begin to fade. The cabin felt full again. It felt alive, the way it used to when Martha was here. Martha, he whispered, I've got 4 kids now. He thought he could almost feel her warmth in the room. He checked his rifle and revolver, then the new bolt he'd put on the door. Tomorrow he'd face a judge who hated being wrong, and a system that had failed 26 children for 6 long years. He didn't know if he could win, but he knew the good folks from that street would be there. He knew Agnes had her proof, and Prescott had a federal badge and 9 graves worth of truth. Most important, he knew 4 children were sleeping in his loft. They were safe and trusted him. They called this place home. That was worth any fight. Caleb rested his head on the table, and for the first time in 5 years, he slept soundly. The courtroom was already packed. Caleb wore his Navy suit, the one he'd married Martha in. His hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. Rosie had tied the red ribbon he'd bought her in her hair. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes. We're gonna win, Daddy. That's the plan, he said. She almost smiled. Noah and Eli walked behind him, shoulder to shoulder. Eli still favored the ribs that hadn't healed right. Sadie held his hand, her big eyes taking in the crowd with a quiet stillness. A crowd of serious-faced adults usually meant trouble was brewing. Clara met Caleb at the courthouse doors, and Lord, it looked like the whole town had crammed itself inside. People were even standing in the aisles. Over by the plaintiff's table, Slade's lawyer looked like he'd just bitten into a sour persimmon. Clara squeezed Caleb's arm. Harlan's here, she whispered. He rode in from Denver and is taking over the hearing. Seems he pulled rank, saying it was his business since he was the one who signed Slade's guardianship papers in the first place. Caleb felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Judge Harlan, the very man who gave Slade a legal piece of paper to run a slave camp. With Harlan on the bench, every bit of good they'd done could just blow away like dust. They pushed their way inside. The noise of 100 conversations hit them first, bouncing off the high ceilings. But when the crowd saw Caleb and the children, a hush fell over the room. Folks turned, stared, and then made a path for them. Slade was at his table, dressed in prison clothes with his hands cuffed to a chain at his waist. The confident mask was back on his face, but the man behind it looked smaller. The swagger of a man used to running the show was gone, replaced by the wary look of a man who knows the room has turned on him. His lawyer, Leland Cross, sat next to him looking like he had not seen a bed in a week. As Caleb got to the defense table, Samuel Graves stood up to greet him. The old lawyer, thin as a rail but with eyes that saw everything, had come all the way from Denver. 70 years old with a voice that could echo across a canyon. How bad is it? Caleb asked quietly. Harlan's a problem, Graves said. He's trying to protect his own hide as much as Slade's. If he says those papers are valid, it means he never made a mistake, and judges purely hate admitting they were wrong. Can we win? We can, if the truth shouts louder than that man's pride. Now sit. The clerk called the court to order, and Judge Harlan walked in. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair and the face of a man who figured he was always right. He sat down, and his gaze swept the courtroom, finally landing on Noah and Eli, on Sadie holding Eli's hand tight, and on Rosie with that little red ribbon in her hair. This hearing, Harlan began, is about the custody of Noah Ward. Mr. Slade has guardianship papers signed by this court, and Mr. Mackenzie is fighting them. He then turned to the federal marshal. Marshal Prescott, let's talk about your warrant first. You got it from Judge Crawford to raid Mr. Slade's mine, and I question your reasons." Prescott stood tall. "Your Honor, the warrant was based on Noah Ward's sworn testimony, a doctor's report detailing awful abuse, and pictures of children in forced labor. Judge Crawford has no say in a state guardianship matter. With all respect, Your Honor, forcing children to work like that is a federal crime. The warrant was solid. That is for me to decide, Marshal." Harlan's voice was pure ice. "If I decide that warrant was improper, then every piece of evidence you got, the records, the photos, the children's stories, all of it gets thrown out." A murmur went through the room. Caleb felt his blood run cold. Harlan was going to erase everything. "Your Honor, if I may," Graves stood up. "Go on, Mr. Graves. Before we argue about the warrant, I ask the court to listen to the children. Their words didn't come from a warrant. Their pain isn't evidence you can just seize and throw away. They are human beings who have a story to tell. No matter what you decide, you cannot silence them." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Fine. I will allow their testimony," he said. "Thank you, Your Honor." Graves turned. "I call Eli Ward to the stand." Eli stood up, his legs steady, even if his hands were clenched into fists. He walked to the witness stand, put his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth in a voice that didn't shake one bit. Graves spoke to him gently. "Eli, how old are you?" 13. "And how long were you at Mr. Slade's mine?" 4 years. "Since I was 9. Tell the judge what it was like." Eli looked right at Harlan, not at the bench or the robe, but at the man himself. "We worked underground 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. The smallest kids had to go into the narrow tunnels where no one else could fit. If a shaft collapsed, you either dug your way out or you died in the dark." "Did Mr. Slade give you medical care?" "No, sir. If you got hurt, you worked anyway. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. If you complained, they put you in the hole." "What is the hole?" "It's a pit in the ground, 6 feet deep. They'd throw you in and put a grate over the top so the snow and rain came right in. No food, no water. I was in there 3 days once. Why? For asking for water, for dropping a tool, for looking at Mr. Slade the wrong way." Eli's voice turned hard as rock. "Because he could do it. Did children die there?" "Yes, sir. I can name them." Eli took a deep breath. Thomas was 10. A tunnel fell on him. Slade left him buried for 6 hours. Mary was 8. She died of pneumonia because Slade said she was just faking sick. James was 12. Slade beat him for stealing a piece of bread. Beat him so bad he died 2 days later. Eli's voice was flat, like he was reciting a list for someone else, because feeling it all would have broken him. "How many children died?" 9 that I know of." Mr. Cross stood up. "Objection. The witness is guessing. The witness is testifying to what he saw with his own 2 eyes, Your Honor." Graves shot back. "This boy lived in that hell for 4 years. He has a right to tell you what he saw." Overruled. Graves moved a little closer. "Eli, tell the judge about Sadie." For the first time, Eli's control started to crack. Sadie was 6 when she got there. She was so little. They put her in the tightest shaft on her first day. She screamed for hours. No one could get to her. Who took care of her? I did. I couldn't protect my own brother, Noah. I thought he was dead for 3 months because Slade told me he'd killed him, told me it was my fault." Eli's jaw was set like stone. "I wasn't going to let the same thing happen to Sadie. Is Sadie here today?" "Yes. She's right there." Eli pointed to Sadie, who was sitting in Rosie's lap. "She's 7 now. She still won't talk to grown-ups. Only to me and Rosie." Graves turned to the judge. "No more questions." Cross got up slowly, like a man being forced to walk into a fire. "Mr. Ward," he began, "didn't Mr. Slade give you food and a place to sleep? He gave us slop not fit for hogs and a cold tent in the dead of winter. But he did provide it, didn't he? A prison gives you food and a bed, too. That doesn't make it a kindness. You're 13 years old, Mr. Ward. Isn't it possible you are making things sound worse than they were because you were angry?" Eli just looked at him. Then he pulled up his shirt. A gasp went through the courtroom. His back was a roadmap of pure cruelty. Scars laid over top of other scars, old and new. You could see where his ribs had been broken and healed all wrong. "Does this look like discipline to you?" he asked. Cross just turned away. He didn't ask another question. He just walked back to his table, sat down, and refused to even look at Slade. Next, Graves called Noah. The boy walked to the stand with Rosie holding his hand tight until the very last second. "You'll do just fine," she whispered. Noah sat down in the big witness chair. He looked small and young, but his eyes were clear as glass. "Noah, you heard what your brother said. Is it true? Every single word. Do you have anything to add?" Noah looked straight at Judge Harlan. "Your Honor, you're the one who signed the papers that let Mr. Slade take us. Maybe you didn't know what he was doing, but you know now. You've heard what happened and seen what he did to my brother." The courtroom was dead quiet. "I'm only 9 years old. I can't make you do what's right, but I'm asking you. Please don't send us back. Please don't let some papers be more important than our lives." Harlan just stared at the boy. "I'm not asking for pity," Noah said. "I'm asking for justice, the kind that protects children." "Thank you, Mr. Ward." Harlan's voice was gravelly. "You can step down." Graves then called Agnes, who laid out the medical facts plain and simple. 37 lash marks, cracked ribs, burns, and starvation. When she finished, the room was in a horrified silence. Then Graves called Caleb to the stand. "Mr. Mackenzie, why did you take Noah Ward in?" "Because my daughter asked me to. And because I saw in that boy every person I'd ever failed. My sister Annabelle, my friend Thomas at Antietam, my wife Martha." His voice cracked. "For 5 years after Martha died, I was just going through the motions. Noah woke me up. He reminded me some things are worth fighting for. What will you do if this court rules against you?" "I'll fight it. Every appeal I can file. And if all that fails," Caleb looked the judge square in the eye, "then I'll do what any father would do. I'll protect my children, even if it means breaking your law. Your Honor, I watched boys younger than Eli die so that no person could be another's property. If the law says I have to send these children back to that, then the law is wrong. And I won't follow it." Judge Harlan leaned back. The whole room held its breath. Harlan called for a recess. 30 minutes. It was the longest 30 minutes of Caleb's life. The children gathered round him. Rosie climbed into his lap. "Daddy, what if he says no?" she whispered. "Then we just keep fighting." Noah put a hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens, you gave us a family. Nobody can take that from us." Eli nodded. "He's right. We had this. That's more than we had before." Caleb pulled all 4 of them close. His children. Whatever the judge decided, this right here was real. This was family. The clerk called them all back inside. Harlan took his seat. "I've considered all the testimony presented today," he started. "I have reviewed the medical proof, and I have heard from the children themselves. For 3 long years, a terrible injustice stood because I made a mistake." Judge Harlan's voice was steady, but it carried the weight of a guilty conscience. "A man named Morai Slade walked into my court with a sad story about orphans, and I signed the papers. I didn't dig deep enough. That failure is mine, and it's a weight I'll carry to my grave." His voice trembled just once. "I can't undo the horror those children endured. I can't bring back the 9 souls we lost. I can't give Noah and Eli Ward or little Sadi their childhoods back. The law just ain't that powerful." He locked eyes with Slade. "But here's what I can do. I am declaring every single guardianship paper signed by Morai Slade to be null and void. They were built on lies and used for pure evil." Slade shot up from his chair. "You will sit down, Mr. Slade, or so help me, I will have you gagged." As his lawyer pulled him down, the judge continued, "Furthermore, I am granting Jesse Mackenzie's request for permanent custody of Noah Ward." Harlan then looked straight at Caleb. "And based on what we heard today, I am giving you custody of Eli Ward and the little girl known as Sadi." At that moment, Rosie let out a scream of pure 7-year-old joy that echoed through the whole courtroom. She wrapped her arms around Noah, who hugged Eli, who reached out for Sadi. All four of them tumbled to the floor in a heap of laughter and tears, making the kind of sound that happens when a heart finally breaks open with happiness. Judge Harlan gave them their moment. "Mr. Slade," he said finally, "regarding the federal charges, all the evidence found at your property is admissible. The testimony from these children stands. Those 9 graves on your land will be investigated." "I want an appeal," Slade said, his voice completely empty. "That's your right," the judge replied. "But you'll be making that appeal from behind bars. Marshal Prescott, please get Mr. Slade out of my courtroom. I'm done looking at him." The deputies cuffed Slade and led him out. The man who had terrorized so many walked away in chains, his head low, his confident mask finally gone. There was no anger left in him. There was just nothing. It was the emptiness of a man who built an empire on cruelty, only to see it all crumble. As they passed Caleb's table, Slade stopped and looked right at Noah. The boy stared back, not even blinking. "You ruined me," Slade whispered. "No, sir." Noah's voice was calm and clear. "You ruined yourself. I just told the truth." Once Slade was gone, the courtroom exploded. People were on their feet, clapping and crying, reaching for Caleb and the children. Clara was weeping into her apron. Calloway raised his hands to the heavens, thanking a God he never lost faith in. Caleb just stood there, holding his children tight, letting the wave of love and relief wash over him. 5 years of silence. 5 years of a cold, empty cabin. 5 years of talking to a ghost. It was all over. They walked out of that courthouse into the bright December sun. Folks lined the steps, shaking Caleb's hand, patting the children on the back, their voices a warm welcome home. That wagon ride home was the loudest it had been in years. Rosie chattered the whole way, making plans for Christmas and telling Sadie all about the friendliest chicken. Noah and Eli sat side by side, their shoulders touching, finding comfort in the quiet. Sadie, sitting in Rosie's lap, said only one word the whole trip: home. "That's right," Rosie said. Home. As the sun set behind the mountains, the cabin came into view. Caleb stopped the wagon and just looked at it. It was the same cabin he had built with his own 2 hands, the same porch where he had sat alone for 5 long years. But tonight, it looked different. It looked bigger, warmer, like the old house had been holding its breath, just waiting for them to come fill it up. "All right, everybody, out," Caleb said. "Chores are waiting." They scattered. Rosie took Sadie to see the chickens. Noah headed for the horse barn. Eli just stood in the yard, turning in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. "Eli, yeah, welcome home, son." "Welcome?" Eli's jaw tightened and he blinked back tears. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "This whole family thing, I don't know how it works." Caleb smiled. "Neither do I. My biscuits are awful, and I only own 2 good shirts. We'll figure it out together. What if I mess it up?" "You will. So will I. That's just part of being a family. It ain't easy, but it's worth it." Eli nodded, looking around at his new life. "Caleb, yeah, that little girl Sadie is going to need a lot of help. She has terrible nightmares. Loud noises scare her half to death." "Then we will be quiet when we eat," Caleb said simply. "She's scared of the dark. We will leave a lamp burning for her. She might never be what folks call normal." "Who is?" Caleb put a hand on his shoulder. "She's got 4 people who love her now. That's a good start. We'll handle the rest as it comes." The old hound dog, Biscuit, trotted over and sat at Eli's feet, thumping his tail against the frozen dirt. Eli reached down and scratched his floppy ears. "Noah told me you were a good dog," Eli whispered. Biscuit thumped his tail again. That night, Caleb cooked for 5 people. He burned the biscuits, of course, and filled the cabin with smoke. Rosie declared that her daddy's cooking was a disaster and they needed to call for help. Noah actually laughed. A real, deep laugh. Eli's head whipped around to stare at his brother, his own face softening because he hadn't heard that sound in 4 years. Sadie ate a whole plate of food. When she was finished, she pushed her plate forward and whispered something to Eli. He leaned in. "She wants to know if there's more." "There's always more," Caleb said. every single night for the rest of your life. After supper, the children settled in. Rosie read from a book about horses while Noah and Eli played checkers. Sadie sat on the floor, gently stroking Biscuit's head while the old dog slept. Caleb washed the dishes, listening to the sounds of his family, the crackle of the fire, and the clicking of bottle caps on the checkerboard. This was what his wife, Martha, would have wanted. Not the lonely silence, but this, a cabin full of life. He dried his hands and stepped out onto the porch. Millions of stars glittered in the cold Colorado sky. The door opened behind him and 4 sets of footsteps followed him out. "We want to see the stars, too," Rosie announced, with Sadie perched on her hip. They laid blankets on the cold wood and huddled together, 5 people and 1 old dog, all looking up at the endless night. Rosie pointed out the constellations she knew and made up names for the others. Noah asked questions about the universe that had no answers. Eli just held Sadie close. "Caleb," Noah asked quietly in the dark. "Yeah. Do you think Mama can see us?" Caleb thought about Martha and the 5 years he had spent talking to her ghost on this very porch. "I don't know for sure," he said, "but I think she can feel us. And tonight, I bet she's smiling." He nodded. "I reckon she can. What you figure she'd say?" "She'd probably say it took me long enough." Eli chuckled low. Rosie let out a little laugh. "Caleb," Eli said again. "Yeah, son. Thank you for coming to get us. For standing your ground when it would have been easier to just walk on by. For all of it. No need to thank me. Yeah, I do. 'Cause for 4 long years, nobody came. Nobody fought for us. Then you showed up with a bad leg, a rifle, and a 7-year-old girl, and you changed our whole world. Rosie changed everything. I just handled the reins." "Daddy?" Rosie's voice was thick with sleep. "You did more than that." "Go on to sleep, Rosie girl. You saved 'em, Daddy. They saved me right back." One by one, they drifted off. Rosie first, tucked against Caleb, then Sadie, and Noah. Eli fought it the longest, that old habit of keeping watch, but his eyes finally closed. Caleb just laid there under the stars, listening to his family breathe. 4 kids the world had thrown away, who'd seen things no child ever should. 4 children who found each other and then found him. He thought about Martha and Annabelle and about all the folks he couldn't save, and the ones he finally did. He remembered Rosie in that town square, asking a question that broke his life wide open and put it back together better than before. "Daddy, can we take him home?" The answer was always going to be yes. Caleb closed his eyes. The wind whispered through the prairie grass and the stars wheeled overhead. The dogs snored soft, and the children breathed deep. In a little cabin on a Colorado ranch in the winter of 1887, a family that had no earthly reason to exist slept under a sky full of light. They were whole, built from nothing but pure grit and a whole lot of love, and that was more than enough. That was everything.